So, welcome everyone to the first session of our mini series called A World Without, which emphasizes the challenges faced by, but also the value and the opportunities within the field of the arts and the humanities. This is a taster session or a mini lecture or an introduction for prospective students and general members of the public predominantly, and it aims to highlight the excellent teaching and research that is taking place at Oxford Brookes University. My name is Maya, as you can see. I'm a research fellow for the Creative Industries Research and Innovation Network here at Oxford Brookes. And the network aims to bring together researchers, teachers, practitioners, students, and communities interested in and involved in the creative industries as broadly defined as possible. We aim to be very inclusive in the subjects and the areas that we engage with. So today's session is called A World Without Literature, a bit of a provocation. And we are very proud to have Dr. Antonia Mackay, who is a senior lecturer in publishing and coordinator for the MA Journalism program. Before her academic career, she worked in the creative industries, including for Vogue magazine, GQ, and Calvin Klein. Antonia's work currently spans across American literature and culture, media studies, screen studies, surveillance studies, and feminist corporeality. So she is a particularly interesting, erudite, knowledgeable speaker. I've been to many of her presentations in lots of different contexts, and it's always a pleasure to listen to her. So we're very, very happy to have her kick off our series today.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for my introduction. I have actually slightly changed my job title one part. I'm no longer running the MA journalism. I run the undergrad MJP now. So just for the sake of contact information.
And what is MJP?
Media journalism and publishing. So yes, and as Maya said, I'm going to be kicking off this series of talks. And this particular talk is going to focus very much on education. It's going to be a focus that looks at what happens when we take the literature out of the processes that shape our society and our culture. And I'm going to be looking at the changes to higher education and how we can change our approach to humanities and arts and how things are already beginning to turn. So I suppose this is my warning of it's a bit depressing for the first half, as anything that starts with a world without should be, but it will get better. So bear with me. Okay, so yes, welcome. Welcome to A World Without. And this particular talk is A World Without Literature. Now, it's probably a good place to start to think about how we define literature. Now, this is a dictionary entry of literature, and it says the things you'd think it would. So it says written works, creative writing. It says those are superior or lasting artistic merit. I think I can speak for many colleagues when I will say we will start debunking that pretty quickly. But it is interesting to note how many areas fall under literature. So the textual appears everywhere. Written works, writings, creative writings, literary texts, compositions, publications, texts, reports, studies, printed matter, brochures, leaflets, pamphlets, circulars, flyers. There's a really broad way of interpreting literature. And somebody like myself who has a background in magazine journalism and is an academic with a PhD in American literature, but teaches media journalism and publishing, will tell you that I absolutely embrace this broad definition of literature. And it is exactly this that I'm going to be talking about. I'm not just going to talk to you about books. I care about books, but I'm going to talk to you about the textual in all of its forms. So to give ourselves a definition that we're going to be working with, the definition I'm going to be working with is partly the classical sense. So any collection of written work, prose, fiction, drama, poetry. Yes, I will be talking about some of that stuff. But I will also be talking about some of these other definitions. So a book chapter, a journal article, a conference paper, a newspaper, a government report, a web page, a thesis. There is a really broad range of literature that's going to be explored here. And this is deliberate in a way because so much of what we do in arts and humanities, where literature seems to reside predominantly, is interdisciplinary and goes beyond what some people may consider arts and humanities. So hopefully I'm going to demonstrate that over the next sort of 30 minutes. Okay, so this is the definition we're working with. This is how I'm going to be talking about literature. Okay, so why am I proposing a world without literature? This is the depressing part. There have been lots of changes made to the way in which arts and humanities programs are funded, attended, and registered for. So you can see here, I've pulled a couple of pieces of information. On the left, we've got a quote there from the Higher Education Policy Institute, which says between 1961, 1962 and 2019-20, the proportion of UK students studying humanities subjects fell from around 28 to around 8% of, there's the first count, to 8% of all students. So you can see a dramatic decline in the total number of students studying the humanities over, okay, a very large amount of time. But that tells you something. If 8% of all students are studying the arts and humanities, that's a very small number of students. And you can also see that in the chart at the top right of the page, which is taken from the Times of Higher Education. And you can see this one from 1987 to 2015. That sharp decline at the top there is English. So that red line is the number of students taking English at university. Then that green line is history. The blue one is modern languages. And the bottom one is philosophy. And then I pulled this quotation. This is a screenshot from an article from the Wall Street Journal, which starts with liberal arts rip. The liberal arts are dead. I did warn you the beginning was depressing, but it will get better. So there are changes happening in higher education. And the question that we should all be asking ourselves is, why are these changes happening? Well, as this little quotation here on the left from the British Academy tells us, many humanities subjects have endured a challenging decade, a trend that has continued into 2022. Between 2021 and 2022, numbers across almost all humanities subjects at GCSE and A-level decreased. And if you wanted further evidence, you can see from this chart on the right, A-level entries in English in pink and A-level entries in maths in green. And that's a smaller period of time. That's 2017 to 2020. And just to really get my point home, changes to arts and humanities funding at university has also affected the number of arts and humanities students coming into higher education. So for us on the research side, the AHRC said it would cut the number of PhDs. It funds from 425 to 300 per year by 2029. That's a 29% reduction. That's the Arts and Humanities Research Council. So that would have an impact on the number of people coming in to do PhDs in arts and humanities in higher education. And this bottom quotation, I'll read you the whole quotation because I think it tells us a lot about what's happening. This is London School of Economics. So creative and humanities subjects are once more in the crosshairs of government subsidy cuts for teaching grants, with some facing a proposed reduction of up to 50% in 2021-2022. These subjects are those that have been categorized into C12 and include performing and creative arts, media studies, and archaeology. In real spending, these proposed cuts mean that funding support for arts courses in the academic year 2021-2022 would be reduced from 36 million to 19 million. The decision is the result of Gavin Williamson as Education Secretary sending a statutory guidance letter to the Office for Students in January 2021, stating that OFS should reprioritise funding towards the provision of high-cost, high-value subjects that support the NHS and wider healthcare policy, high-cost STEM subjects, and/or specific labour market needs. So, probably from about 2010 onwards, what we have seen is a gradual shift in numbers in arts and humanities in education. And again, that is drummed home in that graph showing the proportion of UK Research Council budgets allocated to the AHRC, that's the Arts and Humanities, versus the ESRC, which is the Economic Social Research Council. Now, I did say this would be very depressing, and this is where that depressing part starts to shift a little bit, at least. Because what I am proposing is that there is a way to rethink the arts and humanities, that if this is the position that government policies, that funding policies, and that choices that are being made beyond our control have dictated the landscape, well, there are still ways that we can challenge the place of arts and humanities. So let's start to feel enthusiastic about the ways in which literature has changed our world. So what would a world look like without all of this? What would happen if there were no arts and humanities? What would the world feel like? I'm going to pull a few examples. I could have written these slides, hundreds of times over, but I'm just going to point out a few ways in which a world without literature, starting with books, might have looked. So had we not had arts and humanities, had we not had people writing fiction and writing creative writing and writing poetry that were turned into books, we may never have understood the pain and suffering of slavery, perhaps. We may never have understood what it was like for America's slaves to have been brought up through that system. So without something like Frederick Douglass's A Narrative of the Life of a Slave, maybe we would not have known what had happened. And indeed, latterly, maybe we would not have understood the complexities of gender and slavery had we not had Toni Morrison's Beloved. I could add to that poetry, I could add to that Claudia Rankine. I could add all of the myriad ways in which we have created a more diverse and understanding world because of these books. We also may not have learnt the joy of comedy. We may never have learnt to laugh without William Shakespeare's comedies, histories, and tragedies. So had we not had these plays being produced during the 1600s and shown at the Globe, perhaps we would never have understood a range of human emotions and how that could enrich our lives. And perhaps we might also have never understood the power of culture in shaping our society if we had never had or read George Orwell's 1984, or indeed Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. These are books that responded to their time in ways that offer us a way of viewing the past and offer us a way of understanding not only something that has already happened, but also a kind of prophetic look at something that could happen. These are not just responses, they're warnings as well. So we might not have had these. I think how much we would have been missing out on. We may also not have experienced the complexities of human emotions like those explained in contemporary fiction, like A Little Life, or The Kite Runner, or The Heart's Invisible Furies. Or I could have added to that Margaret Atwood, anything by Margaret Atwood. These works of fiction by those who have been educated in arts and humanities may never have enriched our lives in these really fundamental ways. And I did say that I was approaching this in a very holistic sense, that literature for me is not only these canonical texts, it is also newspapers and magazines, it's textual material. And, let's think about that as well. If we had never had the news reports coming out of the First World War, would we necessarily have understood what was happening during that time? And would we have a record today other than letters? Letters and newspapers. Would we not, without those, without journalists to have written those, reporting those, producing those in publishing houses, would we not have understood what was happening during that time, and therefore understood how it shaped our society and our culture and our ideas about our society and culture? And if we had not had magazines and newspapers, would we have understood the groundbreaking way in which 9/11 was reported through the media? I see that as a bookending of a generation. And in the past, when I've taught literature, I have always said that really the contemporary moment is 9/11 onwards, because so much changed during that one moment. The way that this was reported, war on America, would we have understood this had it not been for the way it was covered through the media and published and written about through journalism? And perhaps we might not have been able to gauge and read culture through magazines. Magazines offer us a fascinating snapshot into, if it's a week, or if it's a monthly feel for culture. It offers us a representation, a snapshot, where it pulls together ephemera to create a glimpse into that moment in time. So would we have that kind of cultural richness if it were not for magazines and people writing magazines and editors? Possibly not. And would a world without literature be even possible without academic essays and textbooks? I said I'm taking this broad view of literature. I mean, I hate to think what the world would be like if we had never considered rereading the world around us through a feminist lens. If we'd never had feminism, if we'd never had Simone de Beauvoir and the second sex, or we'd never had Mary Wollstonecraft, in the 1800s, writing about women, perhaps we would be further back than we already are. But we may have been in a worse position. And would we have ever understood the process of evolution if we hadn't had Darwin's The Origins of the Species? We think of all the ways that has impacted our society and our culture, our understanding of science and the world around us. And perhaps, again, we might also have never have learned about feelings and thoughts and emotions had we not had Sigmund Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams. Now, I get that Freud is problematic, but perhaps, this is still the beginning of reinterpreting our sense of self. And if we had never had that, maybe we would never have understood ourselves, or how to think about emotions and dreams and our mental states. And finally, perhaps we would never have been inspired into any kind of thinking of revolution had it not been for Karl Marx's and Frederick Engels' Communist Manifesto. So a world without literature is, in my opinion, a world that is pretty bland, dull, boring, beige, as I would say, something is beige if it's pretty just kind of meh, and lifeless. I think that's the really important part. Lifeless. Because the humanities injects the human back into everything that we do. So for me, a world without any of these things would be pretty lifeless. So let's come out of that kind of sadness, and hopefully you're feeling a little bit invigorated into thinking about the ways in which we can be revolutionary. How can we ensure that there is a world with literature? Well, this is what I'm going to suggest is happening. What I suggest is happening is that we have a world that is increasingly interested in what's called STEM. So that's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And we have an education system and a policy system that is increasingly interested in STEM subjects. Now, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think, we live in the age of artificial intelligence. We are in a technological moment. So much of what we do is digital. There is no need for us to reject that. But what I think we should be doing, and I assume everybody here is interested in arts and humanities, is to inject the A back into this and turn STEM into STEAM. And I think with STEAM, we can achieve an enormous amount in the future, reinvigorating the way in which we think about arts and humanities in this context, but also benefiting science and technology and mathematics. The example that always comes to mind is you can't have a good game if you don't know how to write a good story. So the A in STEAM is absolutely fundamental, and one that I'm sure we all agree needs to be pushed to the forefront. So this is where I start to show the ways in which STEAM is already with us, and STEAM can be a model for us. So this is about my research now. So just briefly, I'm going to talk about the STEAM model in research. Now, as you will have noted from the picture on the right-hand side, that is a still from a lecture that I gave a couple of months ago. My research is, as I've put on the left-hand side, a nexus. I think that's a really good way of describing it. It is a sort of coming together of lots of different things that you wouldn't necessarily put together. Maya said at the beginning of this talk that my background is English literature, but it is also magazines. I've also worked in public relations. I've published in media studies and cultural studies. I also used to teach fine art. So I'm sort of a bit of a coming together of lots of areas in STEAM myself. But what I do that I think is exciting, and I think it's something that we can encourage and we see more and more in our students, is this bringing together of what seem like disparate areas. So remember I said that the point about STEAM is to inject the human back into STEM. And we know that lots of terrible things happened during the pandemic. My research is into what happened to mothers, first-time mothers in particular, during that time. And I'm particularly interested in the role technology played. Now, I'm sure somebody who works for Zoom would probably be able to tell me lots of things about what they did during the pandemic. Maybe they'd be able to give me lots of statistics about the number of people that used Zoom, or the different ways in which Zoom was applied in various settings. What they wouldn't be able to tell me is what effect that had on the people who used it. And that's the really important part for me, where humanities and arts absolutely is a necessity and allows us not only to say that 80% of maternity units in the UK switched to using Zoom, but being able to say it had this effect on the people, the mothers, the babies that used it. And that's crucial, really, in the world in which we live in. So I am interdisciplinary, and you can see that in some of the stuff that I have written. So these are some of my books. And they look, don't they? Some of them look, especially the one with the camera and the eyes. You can kind of tell that I would call myself a surveillance expert. Um, this is my area of research, and this is why I'm able to do a project on technology and mothers. Now, bear with me for a moment. My PhD, you might be thinking, you told us you had a background in English. How does this fit with English? Well, my PhD was about English literature, specifically American literature, but I read American literature through spatial settings. So I'm very, very interested. That's not space, by the way, as in astronauts and stars, but that's spatial settings in the sense of what happens when you stick somebody in a house versus you stick somebody in a forest. Um, does that do something to their sense of self? Now, taking that and then an interest in technology, what we end up with is an interest in what happens when you watch people. And that's kind of where all of my recent publications, these ones, have come from. They've come from not only an interest in the digital and the technological, but an arts and humanities focus in what happens to somebody's sense of self when you record them or you watch them or you recreate, even if you don't have a camera, you recreate a sense of watchedness. So some of these books don't even have necessarily a camera or a piece of technology in them. What I find fascinating is the sense of watchness that can be created just from other people, and other people can be a surveillance system. So surveillance is kind of the thing I do, and the thing that I apply in media, but also in literature, in screen studies. You can see it with Westworld there, and that one at the bottom, that was all about Stranger Things. So I'm just not I'm hoping I'm proving that arts and humanities isn't just those really old canonical classic pieces of literature. There is nothing wrong with loving those. It's about how we communicate those. Um, and again, if you wanted to see what I mean by surveillance in the arts, because again, it sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? It sounds like two different things that shouldn't sit alongside each other. How can you be tech and arts? Well, I'm tech because I'm interested in the technology and the processes of watching, but I'm interested in the effects. So that's the arts, that's the humanities, that's the human coming back in. And really, the joy of being an academic is that you'll see from these excerpts from chapters that I've written in some books that I wrote about Stranger Things because I loved it. And I was really interested in what was going on with nostalgia as a form of surveillance. So yeah, the joy of being an academic is that I can apply some of this stuff to things I like. And the same applies for American Horror Story. I was just really interested in American Horror Story. So I wrote about it. But these things show exactly this interdisciplinarity, this nexus, this bringing together of these different areas, that this is written by a literature person, ostensibly a literature person, who is writing about reality TV and American Horror Story and nostalgia and Stranger Things, but doing so in ways that incorporate technology and surveillance and architecture. So you can see the ways in which these areas cross over into what you might call STEM, but bring bring the arts, bring the humanities with it. And the eagle-eyed among you will notice that that's me on the right. And that was when my daughter was born. So just to give you one final piece of information about why I think STEAM works, my motherhood project was entirely influenced. Really, it was, I mean, let's face it, the whole thing wouldn't exist without me having been one of those first-time mothers during COVID. And that's my daughter, Ava, when she was born. So what I hope I'm demonstrating is that real life experience, real human experience, and feelings and emotions and tragedy and comedy and all of these things that we experience as humans is the arts and humanities that we absolutely need, because without it we lose that life full or life giving energy that is so necessary for us to understand how we can make our worlds better. So hopefully I'm convincing you that research in the humanities and arts at Oxford Brookes is already putting the A into STEAM. And I'm not alone. So I have quite a few colleagues who are already doing exactly this. Arts and humanities are far from dead. I should be writing to the Wall Street Journal and complaining about the way in which they said liberal arts was RIP, because so much of what we do is doing exactly this. It is injecting the A back into STEM. And here are just 4 examples from my colleagues at Oxford Brookes. So you've got Girlhood, Schools and Media from Michelle Paul. You've got Eric White's books about machine learning and modernist transatlantic. You've got my colleague Miriam Johnson's books on books and social media. And you've got my colleague Professor Alex Goody's books on technology, literature and culture. These are humanities people. We are trained in arts and humanities, and many of us have PhDs in very similar areas: English, creative writing, those sorts of disciplines. And yet, look at the way in which those arts and humanities skills are fundamental to better understanding technology and the world around us. And perhaps nowhere is the importance of literature more evident than in our media, journalism and publishing honours. So, as I said at the beginning of this talk, I now run, as the subject coordinator, the Media, Journalism and Publishing BA Hons at Oxford Brookes. And I thought I'd mention it because coincidentally, we're #1 in the league tables. But this is a place where you can see that STEAM. You can see those interdisciplinary elements coming into full force. And if you wanted to, by all means, you can go and have a look at our website, and you can go and have a look at our Media Journalism and Publishing homepage on the Brookes website. But this just demonstrates that an arts and humanities program is able to teach you technology and design. It's able to teach you about marketing and business. It's able to teach you video journalism. It's able to teach you data. This is not just siloing a version of the arts that we might have come into this talk thinking you were going to hear about. So I'm going to end the talk now by asking everybody, although I know Maya has her own set of questions to ask you, but I want to ask you on the back of this talk and understanding that there is a place for us to insist upon the human in this landscape, as I hope I have demonstrated. What will you learn that puts the A back into STEAM? So thank you.